I want to welcome all of you. Thanks for coming. I'm glad it's not pouring rain like it has been the last couple of days. We began these panels at a time when the value of picture books was really questioned. And here we are at the fifth panel. And I think thanks to authors, illustrators, publishers, booksellers, librarians, teachers, and parents, we've proved that indeed picture books are valued and they are a very important part of children and teens literature. I especially want to thank the publishers for today because they have made it possible for these individuals to be here. I started the idea about this panel when we kept seeing picture books about journeys of refugees. And there was, obviously in the past, there was Sean Tan's The Arrival. There's The Two White Rabbits. There's the book by the Italian author, The Journey. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to feature that for our next panel? Well, everybody lived in Australia and Italy and Mexico, but Groundwood is the publisher for Jorge Argueta. And because they said yes, this panel was created. So I have to say a big thank you to them. And I believe Lee and Lowe has also helped to support his appearance here today. Kids Can Press was another press that came to our rescue and said yes, they would send Shane. And then Penguin of Penguin Random House. Donnie Kay, our rep, told us all about the Book of Mistakes. And then she has immediately told us about Namrata Tripathi, who's going to be doing the moderating for the day. So an enormous thank you to all those people. Now to the introductions. Everyone on this panel has been recognized for their incredible work, so I'm not going to delineate all of the many awards. But I'm going to start with Jorge Argueta, who is a native Salvadorian and a Pipi Now Indian. And he's going to correct all my pronunciation later. He's an award-winning poet and writer, and he finds, I love this, he finds young children are natural poets, and he believes that poetry is for everyone. He grew up listening to fantastic stories told outside of his family's restaurant. And he left El Salvador in 1980 amidst the deadly war and political situation that was at that time, and lost important people in his life, a supportive teacher and many of his friends. He arrived in San Francisco and he joined a Chicana writers and began writing chapbooks. His first book, A Movie in My Pillow, was published by Children's Press in 2001. And he's currently working on a memoir about growing up in El Salvador, and there is another memoir that has just been published that I just showed to Lori, who does our university buying, and she's very excited about it, so for you adults. He credits his grandmother, his parents, and the Mother Earth for his inspirations. And he's also founded the Library of Dreams in San Jacinto? Yes, no? San Jacinto. A place for children to dream, strengthen their spirits, and learn about their culture in a multilingual environment. He has to rent a bus to safely transport the children to that library because of the issues in that neighborhood. And today, the publications of his that we are featuring are A Movie in My Pillow and We Are the Clouds, both bilingual editions. Shane Evans is a multi-talented artist in the business of illustration, design, and creative development. He's a world traveler, and his work has been influenced by his travels to Africa, South America, Asia, Europe, the Caribbean, and even the United States. As a child, a family friend and a mentor invited him to help rehab an old building, and their work transformed that space into a working art studio. I think the rest is history. Shane began art school in grade 5 in both Buffalo and in Rochester, and that early introduction enriched his studies in college. And after college, I love this, he worked for Rolling Stone and then went to a job in Kansas City with Hallmark, where he's been since 1993. He opened Dream Studio in 2007, I hope I have the right date for that, a space for young artists to create, participate in artist workshops, show their work, and have access to the work that Shane has created himself. He's described it as a space open to all, a cross-section of all people and ages. And it's not surprising, given that I was really wondering when Shane was going to arrive, that Where the Wild Things are felt very real to Shane. In fact, I have a quote of his that said, "I was there with Max." Today we will feature for Shane Banana Leaf Ball, and I've just learned today that the author of Banana Leaf Ball is here in the audience, and she's right there. And we're also featuring We March, and Banana Leaf Ball is the sign first for May for the Children and Teens Department. Corinna Luyken. As a child, Corinna's mother read Sandberg's Rutabaga stories to her over and over to enjoy the sound of words and to study the ink drawings of Maud and Miska Peterson. It's not surprising that Corinna also worked at a bookstore during high school. She points to the introduction of The Very Persistent Gappers of Fripp by George Sanders and Lane Smith as a turning point for her 17 years ago. And you should go and visit her interview with Jules Danielson from 7 Impossible Things Before Breakfast. It's really a lovely experience to have the back and forth with you two. Mostly self-taught. About 4 years ago, she stopped, and I don't know if you really have stopped, knitting, visiting garage sales, and repurposing furniture. She joined SCBWY, and I think now is history with the Book of Mistakes. She likes to look deeply at books and study the incredible things that she sees there, works such as Silverstein's, Blake, Gorey, Sendak, and Lear, and how they've worked with line and ink. And she has activity sheets that complement her work. We have some with her here, and there'll be some downstairs in the kids' department. And not last, but very not least, is our own Eloise Greenfield, and we can't tell you how happy we are to have her here with us today. When she said yes, there was a collective yay in the department. She was born in North Carolina, but moved to D.C. as an infant, and her family moved to the Langston Terrace, which was created during the New Deal. She grew up hearing stories from her grandmother about growing up in the countryside of North Carolina. And we're indebted to Eloise for the pioneer work she did in writing and fostering literature about African Americans. Her first poem was published in 1962 and her first book in 1972. And her mission throughout her career has been to contribute and develop a large body of African American literature for children and to fill the life of children with the joy of creating with words. And she feels that words nourish the spirit. She was a student of piano as a child and a teen, and she views words as music. Child Times, her 3-generation memoir written with her mother, is now part of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is really cool. And today we will feature of her books, The Great Migration and In the Land of Words. And our moderator today, Namrata Tripathi, and I know I'm not doing the best on that name, is the editorial director at Dial. She's originally from India, but she is a real citizen of the world. We have a late application to the Columbia Publishing course to thank for her decision to work in the world of children's books. She found people in that field smart, interesting, and driven. And I was like, I don't know if I like the idea of driven, but okay. Not only is she interested in the text of children's books, but also in visual storytelling. She's worked at HarperCollins, Disney Hyperion, and Simon before she joined Penguin Dial, and is the editor of today's featured book for Corinna, The Book of Mistakes, which is our sign first for June. And she sees chemistry and passion. You see chemistry and passion when you're looking at your acquisitions. And I learned, and I don't know if this is still true, but she would choose pie over cake, and so would I. So, without further ado.
Thank you so much, Mary Alice, and thank you all for being here today. This is my first time at Politics and Prose, coming down from New York City, and I'm so delighted to be here, and also a little sad to hear that it might be the final picture book panel, so we will try to really make this one count. Okay, she says it every year, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. I wanted to, well, first of all, I'm so excited about this panel, and I just wanted to say it's so lovely getting to meet you back before we got up here, and some of you who I already know. Let's make sure that we treat this as a conversation. So I'm just here to invisibly be in the back, planting some questions, but mostly I hope you will be engaging with each other, because I think we have so much to learn from one another. So I'm really excited to see the interaction that's going to happen between all of you. Before we came out, Eloise, you and I were talking a little bit about how sometimes you're asked or told by people who think they know the answer to the question, is it so fun what you do, right? Is writing for children fun? And you'll tell them, it's work. It's work. And I think similarly for many of us who are editors of children's books, it's a pretty common experience to go to a cocktail party or something like this, and someone will say, "Oh, you work on children's books, that's so cute." Or maybe one day you'll get to work on books for adults. And of course, I think all of us know the care and love that goes into making children's books, particularly picture books, which I think are really, the way I try to explain them to people who don't live and breathe in this world, is that they're like a primer on how to be a human, right? And then people sort of say, oh, okay, I guess that's not just like a thing you do at recess or whatever. And I think with picture books, we have our first opportunity to be exposed to fine art. It's our first opportunity to interact with literature and understand how language might shape the way we see the world and ourselves. And of course, one of the things that we talk about a lot with all forms of literature is how it's so essential in building empathy and in creating ways for us to understand one another, right? And I wondered what you all think about what makes the picture book as a form particularly suited for this endeavor, more so than other forms of literature or art that we use to convey who we are and to connect. So, any of you?
Deep. No, it's deep. It's like she uses words. Thank you for the introduction. It's really, we're supposed to be having a conversation up here, so it's beautiful to sit with this wonderful group of people. Maybe from that perspective, it looks like we've known each other for years, but we literally just met. But I've known you for years,
Mm-hmm.
But I think in some ways, the picture book in and unto itself, for me as an illustrator, someone who still likes to play with crayons in a way, is a way for me to communicate my most basic language, So that first time I picked up a crayon as a child and went across a page, and then somebody else responded to it, I was like, okay, then you see what I'm saying,
Mm-hmm.
And then I would start to move forms around, which I still do. It's like taking circles and lines and colors and reconnecting them. And I think there's something to be said about language. It's like, the language of, he has two languages. He has Spanish, English, but there's another language, but we don't call it a language, the language of pictures, So to be able to show a child what a sunrise, like I find that typically children draw a circle and then they do the lines. You see, you can already relate. Like, I'm not even finished. You see what I'm saying? And so you create a relationship, and the empathy word is so big. Everyone can empathize with the sun. The sun must be really tired of shining on the earth, in some ways, because it does it every day. So I always try to, when I go into my pictures, even with these books, I like to start with a certain image that everybody can gravitate to, and then kind of work from there. So it is a challenge, because I like how you put that. Graduating from children's books into adult books, that doesn't make any sense in my mind, because these really are adult books that children, right, that children can also sit down with you and walk you through it, again. So I think that's why, I don't know, we give up something as adults. We say we're done with imagination or something like that until we are surrounded by children, and then we go back to the piece that kind of brought us over to this side. So I feel honored to be able to again play with crayons still, and so it's a language for me.
Buenas tardes. Thank you so much for the invitation and for this beautiful place. I remember the first time I was asked, why do I write children's books? It was a little girl who asked me up here in Chicago. And such a simple question, but in a way, it brought me all the way back, to my youth, all the way back to my childhood, all the way back to my first school, to my grandmama, to my papa, to my mother, to a river, Tepetzapa, to words and sounds, to the language of birds, as my grandmama used to say, tahtani, tahtani, paltegua, mantecascagua, chick, 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 tik, ne, winimes tahtani, na, ya, wiste, como na monsotli, tahtani, jek, check, 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 ni na, wiste, como na monsotli, naha, nemis, negi. The language of the birds, my mama used to call this language that we speak, Nahuatl, and I was just mesmerized as a child to hear her talk, and when you grew up with a grandmama that talked with the fire, with the wind, with the mountains, with the rivers, you as a child you think it's normal, and then you go somewhere else and say, well, your grandmama is a little bit crazy, and say, well, I'm happy that she's the way she is, I'm happy that my grandmama talked to the birds, talked to the river, the mountains, the wind, the fire, and I'm happy that she insisted that I learn that language. My mother never had a book, but she had the birds. She never had a university, a school, but she had all these mountains, all these trees, all this wind that she used to tell me. They listen to them. They have stories to tell us. So when this little girl asked me, why do I write children's books? Because I have a necessity to talk about all these people that have no voice in our history. Children's books in Latin America, that just happened to start it 35 years ago, 40 years ago. Before we had no children's books. This is something really new. So when this little girl asked me, why do I write children's books? So I can fly again, so I can remember, so I can be myself, so I can find the history and talk about the history of my people in a humble, beautiful, simple way. That's why I write children's books. Sometimes I feel like I was flying a kite. Somebody took away that kite from me. I was riding a horse in my hometown, and somebody stole the horse, the joy of riding that horse. I was jumping into that Tepetzapa River, and somebody came and told us it was prohibited to do that. We were planting corn and beans, and they told us that was not our land. They were not our homes, and they ransack us. I write children's stories so that I can talk about all this too, in a humble, beautiful way.
Thank you. That was beautiful, and thank you all for being here and part of this conversation. I think what you were just saying about when your grandmother or your mother didn't have a book, but she had the birds. I think, for me, that is actually a big part of how I think about making books for kids, especially because I write and I draw the pictures both. And I think a lot when I'm reading with my daughter. I have a 7-year-old daughter who can now read on her own, but it was not very long ago that she couldn't read, and she was just looking at the pictures. And in a way, in that picture book, the words were my territory, and the pictures were her territory. And because I had to read the words, I actually would spend a lot less time looking at those pictures than she did. So she often, by the time we got to the end of a book, I would feel like she knew those pictures better than I did. And they were her territory. And I think, in a way, when we are making books for kids, those pictures, especially as an illustrator, for me, they're theirs. And the words are too when they're read aloud by a parent or some adult that they admire, look up to, or spending time with them. Those become theirs as well, but kind of like the sound of the birds, It's theirs in the air. It's a living thing. And the pictures are the thing that is there for them to study and sort of unravel and explore. And one of the things I love a lot about picture books is that you have this dance between the words and the pictures. And sometimes they tell you the same story, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they tell you different things. And sometimes the pictures will even tell you that what the words are saying is not true. And I think there's a great magic in that. And it's a magic that the kids own. It's theirs. They can tell, but you don't have to tell them this thing that the words are saying, that the picture, that's not true. The pictures tell them that, and they often know it before we do. And so not only is it magical, I think it's powerful. I think it's teaching them to look at the world carefully and to pay attention and to make up their own decisions about what they see, and are learning. And so to me, picture books are an incredibly powerful art form and way of, form of communication. And I believe that none of us should ever outgrow them. That's just my thoughts.
It's wonderful to be here. I've been to Politics and Prose many, many times since I lived in Washington. I live here, and it's a wonderful store, and so I'm so happy to be here doing this program and meeting all of my fellow authors and illustrators. I didn't start writing until I was in my early 20s. I never even thought of being a writer. I loved reading, loved books. When I was a child, my father took us to the library every 2 weeks so we could borrow books and return the ones we had borrowed 2 weeks earlier. And in school, of course, we read books. And sometimes the teacher would recite poetry or read a poem, and it sounded like a song, like, how do you like to go up in a swing, up in the sky, so blue? It was a song, and I loved music. Music was an important part of my life growing up, and still is. But I didn't think about actually writing books until I was in my early 20s, and then I started in the wrong way. I thought that if you have the talent, you could write a story. You didn't need to learn how to do anything. You could just write it. And so I gave myself a test to find out whether I had that talent or not. And I said, 3 strikes and you're out. And so I got my 3 strikes very quickly. And maybe a month or a year later, I realized that with your talent that you're born with, you need to learn the craft. There is a craft of writing, and you combine your talent with the craft, the techniques that you study. And so I began to study books on the craft of writing, and I must have read 10, 15 books. I'm not sure now how many, but a lot of books. And it was a fascinating experience because I loved writing. I also subscribed to magazines that gave the talent and gave the, not the talent, gave the craft and taught the techniques. It was a really, I think it was an ideal way to learn, to study books. And then my music, I call it my music, my talent would not be touched. I would just take those techniques, apply them to what I felt and what I wanted to do, and then I finally learned to write. But the other thing I learned was that everybody gets rejections. That saved my life, really, because I just kept sending things out, getting rejections, sending things out. And I had 2 children. I was married. I had 2 children. I had a full-time job, so I wasn't writing 8 hours a day, but I was writing pretty regularly, and it took me about 10 years before I had my first publication. And I was writing for adults and children. Some of my short stories were published in the 60s for adults. And then I realized that children needed to see themselves. And so it became a mission, because as an African American, I knew that African American children were not seeing themselves in books in the way that they should. And so now writing is a pleasure for me, not fun. It's hard work, but it's work that I love. And also it's a mission for me to try to show children how beautiful they are, how intelligent they are, and that they're important in this world. And that's my mission in writing.
So, Eloise, I think the point you make about the mission of your work is a perfect segue to the next question I wanted to ask all of you, which is that the theme of the panel today is about journeys, and it started out because you were looking at a lot of books that had to do with immigration, the immigrant experience, and many of you have written about that. Some of you have written about activism in picture books, through picture books. Corinna, your book really deals with how you can teach someone to see the world differently, right? And all of these things, I think, really contribute to the sense of mission and purpose you bring to your work. And what I'm wondering is, with the current political and social climate, do you feel like your responsibility as a children's book creator, as a picture book maker, is different than you've envisioned it up until this point in your career?
No. So, I mean, you know, I've been I'm going to use a word that sometimes offends people, actually. The older I get, the more aware I am of the repeat, so to speak. And so, like, when I look at what I do as it relates to what's happening in the world today, I could probably get caught up in politics, but that doesn't really serve me as a human being and what I do as a person. Like, sitting down and drawing circles with crayons doesn't really rely on me knowing who the president of a small country in the middle of, I'm just giving it voice, in the middle of nowhere is. Okay? So from that perspective, doesn't matter who is the current president of the nation that I belong to when I'm drawing circles. I'm just giving, because this is a delicate question. When you bring politics, and we're in D.C. too, I'm gonna pull this book out, okay? We March. Because it's a poignant segue. It starts with the sunrise, and like I'm just walk you through a little bit. Okay, cool. This is like a game show, talk show thing. So it actually starts with a moonscape, and it's like a crescent moon, and so there's the circle. You see it, and then it starts with this family. Covered in blue, actually, the blue of night, okay? And then there's a light on in the window. I don't know, maybe you look at it as a rectangle, and I say a light, but it's yellow. And then there's this moment where two members of a family are waking up two other members of a family, however you see it, and I'm gonna jump around. Then they get to Washington in a bus, and then let me just jump around. I'm jumping. It's a hot day. You can relate to a hot day. Then there's some love in this book, by the way. The family together, and then jumping. This is kind of like one of my flagship moments in my picture book storyline. We were just talking about this. My brother's in the audience. He's got a daughter. She was up on the shoulders, and those who have had children or have children, the up on the shoulder thing could go for a while until they get to a little bit, like, then you got to be down on the ground. Exactly, no. And then I'm jumping around, but then there is this historic moment of, like, the dream, so to speak, again. All that with circles, okay, squares, triangles, colors. I'm throwing a curveball at the idea, but I can't imagine what it's like to sit with a child, for the first time. And I can, But like creating this book is like a slice of the reality of now. You know, we tend to dissociate the past and the present. So children have used this book currently to just march within their school, her daughter. So, you know, politics and circles and squares and all these other things as it relates to me as an artist, I don't want you to feel the wrong thing. And I regard that. I'm sure the other artists here as well. Like when we write something, we probably have to clear our minds a little bit, push stuff away. And I think that's, you know, that's something that maybe all of us should do. When you're trying to do your best and there's other things going on, you got to just get back to the politics of, you know, yourself. Like, what do you want to say? How do you want to relate to the story? And I think we just do that through, you do it too, through your work. You know, so it's really like a thing of when people are like, because I've been to those political arenas as an artist. So, you know, when I go inside those spaces, I'm like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. We're doing something slightly different, but we're also having to say, do your best. Like this right here is a reminder. People who think they're ruling and running stuff don't work like that. Don't work like that. There's another generation, and that's another reminder. It's just a reminder. There's another generation coming through. So.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe that we all have a mission. You know, we all do. When I was a young boy, I saw my grandpapa in dancing in horses. I saw my grandmama talking with the fire. I also saw children my own age with no books to go to school, with not a real place to live, a real house. I saw their mamas, their grandparents, their fathers, their siblings having a really hard time. So when I learned that the language of the birds, it meant that I could stand in my heart, my soul, my spirit, and speak about these people and speak about these children in a way that I will give them a voice, you know, a voice that will talk about not only what the rough time that they're going through, but also their history, their love for life, their cultural background, where they come from, their dreams, their aspirations. As a young man, I was moved from my hometown to the city. I was like 14, 15 years old. We had no books at my house, you know. I'll be lying if I say we got beautiful books. You know, we had no books. You know. Never seen so many books like here, you know. But there were a lot of people that came and told us beautiful stories, storytellers, you know, people that were really they had that ability, they're fine. They were fine talkers. I will say, you know, they really. It's like watching TV, you know. So, but when you have all this pain and aches and beauty around you, you know, and when your spirit wants to have something fine to eat, but you want to share it with everybody. You want everybody to have, you know, if I'm gonna have a good plate of beans, I want all my brothers and sisters to have a good plate of beans too, right? So as a young man, I joined the revolution in El Salvador. I was 14 years old, but I didn't know what I was doing, you know. One of my friends came in, you know what, Jorgito, we all here became revolutionaries. Would you like to be a revolutionary? What does that mean? I said, well, you know, we want to be like El Che Guevara. You know, who was that Che Guevara? Oh, that Che Guevara. Oh, you know, Che Guevara is somebody who fought for the poor people. Would you like to do that? I said, sure, you know. Why not, you know? But I didn't know what I was doing, right? I was like 14, 15 years old. Many years went by, you know. One day my cousin came and said, you know, the few books that my papa brought home and that I had brought home, poetry books, a few magazines, you know, and posters of Che Guevara, you know, with the one where he is with the beret, you know. So my sister told my cousin, another young man, he says, you know, all those books and those posters, you guys are troublemakers, you are guerrilla fighters, you know, we're gonna have to burn them, your sister says, because they're ransacking all the schools, all the houses here, you have to leave, you know. So I left El Salvador, you know, many years ago. I didn't leave immediately. I went somewhere else. Well, I'm not going to tell you where I went to. but anyway, so many years went by, and I just last year I received royalties from this book, you know, and you know, when you receive royalties, they send you a letter. And I said, wait a minute, this can't be, you know, I'm reading the letter, and it says, well, you earn all this money, and well, there's too many ones or too many zeros here, you know, I don't believe this, you know. So I make a phone call to the press, and I said, Mr. Tom, you know, there's something wrong here. So there's too many zeros in this letter. He says, no, that's fine. If you're talking about that, that's right. And I felt so happy, you know. The same night I bought a ticket to El Salvador. I wanted to bring books. I didn't want the few books that I had were burned, were destroyed, and I knew that there was something really beautiful about books. I knew that the words that my grandmama was talking about lived also in books. And I knew that the books can touch the spirit, the heart, the mind, and can make people really have different dreams and possibilities, right? So I wanted that for the children of my neighborhood in El Salvador. So I went over and I called my cousin, the one who burned the books, the one who burned the posters, had become a bricklayer. I said, hey man, I'm coming tomorrow. I want you to go wait for me. We're gonna buy a piece of land. We're gonna build a little shack. We're gonna make a library. I said, okay. So he's waiting for me, you know, we buy the land, and somebody came, an inspector came and said, where's the building planning? And seen the building planning. So we put a stick in the floor and said, you see that volcano over there? That's gonna be the door, so our children can see that volcano, so they can have the strength of that volcano. You see this tree here, we're gonna have a window here, so the children can have the sound of the birds, the beauty of the birds singing when they come in here and see some books that we might bring over. Ah, okay. Good enough. Good enough. All right. So we passed that. And then my cousin says, Jorge, you know what? Remember when you guys were troublemakers, guerrilla fighters? All the books that I burned and I was supposed to burn, and the posters, I really didn't burn them. He says, the posters, they're buried somewhere around here. The books, he says, I took them to my hometown, to your town, and with those books, I learned how to read. I taught my grandmama how to read, my mama how to read, and my children how to read. So with that happiness, with that joy, you know, we'll start building what is now called the Library of Dreams, you know. But I see children, I bring authors, I bring books, and we have a little program of reading, you know. So I do believe in the mission that we have, and the strengths that we have to put in our hearts and our minds of our children, so that they can have also dreams to go on in this beautiful life, you know.
That's beautiful. I think the idea of a mission, I think, I think I probably agree that we all do have a mission, even if we don't always know quite what it is, but there's something driving us, and I think certainly if you are in this line of work and you're wanting to make picture books for young people and old people, and young people and old people to share together, there has to be something behind that that is driving you. And I actually think, Jorge, you said it so well about what is it that we do that does open the minds and hearts and spirits of children. And probably for me as a bookmaker, that is one of the most important things. And I'm very interested in how a book can do that for a child, and a book that is read aloud by a grown-up to a child can do that, but also a child can open a book on their own and have that experience. Mm-hmm. And it can be a quiet, solitary experience in a room. And I do know for me as a child, there were a few books that I did discover and read that gave me that feeling of chills up and down my spine, you know, that opened my mind in some way or opened my heart and maybe showed me how to see the world differently, maybe showed me just how to look at my own life differently in a different way, and maybe changed even the way I thought about the world or the way I thought about myself and my place in the world. And those are powerful things that I still remember. I still remember that experience and those books and what it felt like to read them and how special that was. And I think that's not something you can force on someone. That's not something you can talk someone into having that experience. It's a pretty special, pretty magical thing. And for me, as I grew older, I often found it in reading poetry. And I'm a huge fan of poetry, and I always have been. And whether it's a short little poem, a haiku, I'm a big fan of Isa and Basho, and whether it's a longer poem or a poem in translation. Some of my favorite poets are in translation, and I still fall in love with the words in English, and I know that's not even the original language and the original words, and there's still a magic there that transports me. And I think it really does it opens my heart up, it opens my mind, opens my spirit in a way. And that's, if you can have a mission and have it be vague so that hopefully I can make books that are varied and I don't repeat myself and can do a lot of things, that's probably my intent or my hope for what my books would do in the world.
Well, there's so many problems, I don't think we are in danger of repeating ourselves. I think the world is wonderful and beautiful and is hellish. And there's always something that we can comfort people with. And there are always people who need comfort, need food, and need love. And there's so much that a book can give. One of the important things in the title of this session, the power of picture books. I think the power comes from the fact that it's not just a text, it's not just pictures, it's both. And I think they have to both go in the same direction so that one does not contradict the other to begin with. It doesn't contradict the other. And I have written 4 books for which the art came first. So I know that experience from both directions. But when the author or whoever entered the collaboration first, I'll say the author, because more often than not it's the author. When the author writes the words, then the illustrator, in my opinion, should not contradict anything that was said, but can extend what has happened in the book, in the story, in the poetry, and still do their own creation and be creative. And I'll give you an example. In the book, The Great Migration, Journey to the North, that I wrote, Jan Spivey Gilchrist illustrated it. There's a poem near the end about the people on a train, and the poem says that their thinking they're wondering what's going to happen. They're apprehensive about leaving the South and going to the North. They don't know what it's going to be like there. They don't know what their experiences are going to be like there, but they're courageous, and they're going, but they're in deep thought. When Jance Bobby Gilchrist illustrated that poem, that's exactly what she did. She showed people who were on a train in deep thought. And no one was reading a magazine, no one was taking a nap or chatting. They were all thinking about what their lives were going to be like. And even though they were courageous to go, they still knew that there were going to be difficulties, and they had hope. But because the artist is so creative, then Jan did some part of that illustration I didn't deal with in the poem. For example, I didn't say anything about what they were wearing. I didn't say anything about the interior of the train, which is powerful. It's a powerful depiction of the interior of a train from that period, so that the illustrator had a great opportunity to do lots of things that still did not contradict what the poem said. And I think that's where the power comes in, because you have these two forms saying the same thing. They're saying the same thing, and they still are, it's double the effect that it would have otherwise. So, and that happens a lot. When I wrote the poem for Daydreamers, Tom Fieldings had done portraits of children, excuse me. He had done portraits of children over a number of years, and he got in touch with me and asked me if I would try to come up with an idea to put the book put together as a book and write poetry. And so I said, yeah, I'd be glad to. And when I saw, he sent me photocopies. I spread them out on a table, and I expected that they would all have different demeanors. It was the same demeanor. They were all daydreaming. And then I realized that's where the power comes from in this book. It's going to be one long poem about all of these children daydreaming about life, about the world. And so that's what I did. I wrote that one poem. But I wouldn't have dared write poetry that did not reflect what he had said in his art. That would have diluted the power. And so that's my feeling about that.
So I'm curious for the author illustrators, because Eloise, you and I were talking about this earlier about, how does the art sometimes influence the way you're writing the text? And you were saying just this, that really you never want to contradict, you want to enhance what's being said. But if you are the author and illustrator like Shane and Corinna, and you're creating them in tandem, or are you doing one and then the other? And Corinna, I think you and I've talked a little bit about this too, and you were saying that in your process, sometimes it'll be one and then the other will overtake. And how does that dance work for you, and how does it affect kind of your creative process?
I suspect that every book will be different.
Good to know as your editor.
So watch out. I think sometimes the words will come first, and sometimes the pictures will come first. But from there, as the editing happens and as the story grows and evolves, I do think of it as a dance, and I do. With this book in particular, they kind of took turns a little, and so there was a clear sense of the first maybe half of the book of the Book of Mistakes. There was a clear sense of the words that would exist, because it starts with one mistake, and then there's a transformation, and then there's another mistake, and then another solution or a fix or a transformation, and then another mistake. And I had an image in my mind, but the words also drove it. So those almost came together. And then I got stuck. And then when I got stuck, and I was sort of like, where does this go from here? I find my way a lot through play. That's sort of when I don't know where I'm going. the more I sort of relax and let go and experiment, the more likely I am to find a solution that is at once satisfying but also surprising. And I think for me, it's fun when it's surprising, and when I know exactly where I'm going, that's not that fun and it's not that interesting. So it makes the process sometimes a little more nerve-wracking because I don't exactly know where I'm going, but it makes it more interesting, more fun, and often just thrilling when I do find a way for them to work together. So with the second half of this book, there's a giant tree about midway through the book, and it was the ending for a very long time. And it took me a whole year to find the second half of the book. And that process was a lot of drawing, a lot of trying to let the images help me find my way forward, because I had a feeling, I think it's more like an intuition or something, that the solution wasn't in the pictures. But then sometimes I think maybe I'm wrong, and I'd go back and try words. And in the end, the solution is largely in the images. And the way that they sort of take you on a journey and maybe take you somewhere that's a little bit surprising and not quite where you thought it was going. And that, I almost think for me, and I'd be interested to hear some of the poets here talk about it, but for me, I don't know if I could have surprised myself in the same way if it was just words. Mm-hmm. Sometimes images are like, you're drawing and you see a shape and you go, or a color or something, a pattern, and you go, what if I chased after that? And then you follow it, and all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, that's so much cooler than what I would have thought of when I started. And I don't know and I think language can do the same thing. I think you can follow a rhythm or a sound or well, for me when I write, I guess it would be not always an idea, but a series of sounds or rhythms that kind of can take you somewhere surprising.
It's a combination for me. I have to have the music of the words, and that means we know about the rhythm, but also the melody, because when we talk, our voices go up and down. We don't talk in a monotone. And even if we did talk in a monotone, it would still be music. There's music in the words, and so, but your experience is that you do both, the illustrations and the text. When it's separate, usually the author finishes the manuscript, and no matter how long it takes, and then the publisher accepts it, and then they find an illustrator, and then the illustrator has the whole manuscript. So they're not going back and forth. They have the whole manuscript, and they illustrate that. So that makes it a little different from, One thing, too, when you can do both, you have total control.
You do, which is exciting and terrifying. I've
been very fortunate in the illustrators that I've had. And the other book that's here is In the Land of Words, and it's a very different book. Jan Spivey Gilchrist has different styles. So this is brightly colored, fun, and The Great Migration is a serious book, but not unpleasant, but serious about people trying to make changes in their lives.
Sometimes I see, like, I literally see colors, and so a lot of times with books, see, it's all out of whack. But with books, everybody can hear this, yes? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Everybody can hear that, yes? Something happened, you could hear the changes, right? Like, maybe some musicians in the room. So, this is a process right here. Literally, it's a process. So that's a chord progression, and literally this chord progression happened after the book was done. Like, so the book was done, the words were written, and then this chord progression. And here's the book. I just want to show you. I just happen to have this book. So, I mean, yes, of course, I was on a mission, but this book, that song is called "I'm a Rainbow." Like, and I wouldn't know how these are connected, but it's sort of like one thing kind of leads to another. This We March book had some chord progressions to it too, which was like a little bit like grittier. So like that feel of we're like marching down the street, minding our business. It's like there's music and visuals and words, like, so it expands to another place, you know? I think when you create a book, there's another voice that takes place that I don't think that we're always prepared to know where it's coming from. So with pictures and words, because she used sounds, like she used the word sounds and music to describe these things, and they open the door. It's like, all right, well, yeah, sometimes I gotta just pull the guitar out just to get through a page, or turn some music on just to kind of get over that hump or something, you know? And sometimes you need silence to make it happen. So I feel like it's one of these experiences, especially in the collaboration. I love that we're speaking on collaboration. I will get words sometimes, and sometimes I'll create the words, be the author, illustrator. And then working in collaboration with the Banana Leaf Ball, it's layers of stories, you know? It's a true life story that got sent to another person, it got sent to another person, and finally I did it. And I'm like, okay, whoa. You know, how do I get to see into that picture? And sometimes the words help to ignite the image, but it's so, like if I say the word humble to any of you in this room and I say draw that picture for me, that's a tough one to get to, you know, visually. And all illustrators will have like 50 different versions of humble.
Shane, you could just draw my picture because my name literally means humility.
This is something I learned about this person, today for the first time. And I actually challenge you, if you don't know the meaning of your name, one, you can, of course, redefine that meaning. But just Google it, just Google your name. You'd be surprised like how well it connects you in some ways. But it's like the same thing. It's like, see, now I know this thing, and I could do a whole picture book just based on that idea. So I don't know, they correspond. That's the beauty. Even like with him, he knows multiple languages, so it's like he can see it in all different ways too, you know?
Actually, I'm glad you brought up the thing about multiple
But
languages.
but we all do. We all do know all these different languages, you know. You know how to speak wind. You know how to speak water. You know how to speak silence. You know how to speak anger too. You know, we all know all these languages. You know, we just don't practice them enough. You know, but children do. Children, they're amazing. They're natural poets. You know, I'm walking these kids around these trees. You know, and I said, oh, hey, here is this warumo tree. And warumo tree is a tree that has these huge leaves that hang like this. And said, the child looks at the tree and says, "That's not a warumo tree. That's an umbrella tree." He says, you know. And I said, "Sure, you know. Maybe there is a piano tree too, a guitar tree too, a moon tree, you know." So you know, the imagination that has not end. You know, for illustrators, I believe that, like you were saying, sometimes the words come first, sometimes the color, sometimes both, you know, at the same time. I wanted to write about water, you know, how do I write about water? This is this amazing liquid that we drink, that we see but we don't see, you know. So again, you know, I saw my grandmama. I went to my grandmama's arm, heart, spirit, you know. And we talk about this Mother Earth, the beauty of it, the simplicity that we take sometimes for granted. And one thing that we don't do, we talking here like adults, you know. When I'm with children, I don't talk like this, you know. I just have fun. And I just, you know, we don't talk like this, you know. Children said, "Hey, man, you're crazy," you know. You know, really, you know, I'm having a, it's a different way of communicating, right? So anyway, I wanted to talk about this. I wanted to write about this precious water, you know. So again, I went to lullaby myself, my spirit, and the heart, the mind, the spirit of my grandmama, and I let her talk to me. And she talked to me about this drop of water that lives deep in our Mother Earth. And this drop of water comes up, you know. She entangled herself in the roots, rocks, and finally this little drop makes it to the surface of the earth. The little drop looks around, you know, and she says, "Oh my God, it's huge here, but I'm so tired." So she goes and hangs to rest in the spider webs, in the petals, in the tips of leaves, you know. And then she looks again to the bottom and says, "Oh my God, it's so beautiful down there. I think I just dropped myself there." And the little drop, boom, drop herself, you know. And she become a river, a lake, the ocean, that little drop of water. She looks up, you know. She says, "Oh my God, it's so huge up there, you know. I think I'm gonna go up there, you know." And what the little drop of water is going up to the heavens, you know, she's thinking, "My God, I have no color, you know, I have no shape. Yet I have all the colors in me, you know, I have no flavor, all the flavors." So she's having a great time, right? Once she get up there, she says, "Well, you know, I think I like it down there so much, and I'm gonna go back," you know. So she to come back, she became a cloud. She became a water bird, and she comes down again singing, you know. She said, "Well, I guess my name is water. My name is life. You know, I am life. You know, that little drop of water." So I send that story to this guy, this illustrator, you know, this publisher. They had this guy having all these people jumping on rivers, and I say, wait a minute, you know, that's not what I see, you know. That's not what I see. Luckily, I signed the contract in such a way that I will. Hey, I better have a voice, you know. I better talk about it, you know. So luckily, you know, I had to talk to this, but the illustrator was sensitive enough, you know. He heard me, and I said, "Look, I'm talking about the spirit of life. I'm talking about this journey that this little drop does, but it also is I'm talking about the simplicity that we can't drink water. I said we can't drink gold. We can't drink money. I said you can't drink bank accounts. You know, you need water. I said, "Oh, now I get it." He says, "I get it." He says, "Oh, I get it." So there's no persons, just symbols. You know, just nature. You know, this and I think that that's the power of colors, the power of words, you know, the power of Mother Earth, you know, that gave us life, you know, and you who illustrate, you have that also that dream, that responsibility to show us that those beautiful images, you know, that sometimes we can just put together with words, you know.
Now, all of you have talked about stops and starts that you've had in your work, interactions with illustrators that didn't go the way you wanted them to. Corinna, your entire book is called The Book of Mistakes. And I'm wondering, are there people here who are writers and illustrators themselves?
Yes.
Couple. And so I thought maybe it would be helpful before we open it up to questions from the audience to hear in your journey as an artist and creator, a mistake that led to a breakthrough, or actually, I feel like we always get those things where it's like, I had this mistake, but really it was a blessing in disguise, and here's how I've succeeded. Sometimes I think it might be helpful for us in our own creative journeys to learn from your mistakes. So what's a mistake also that you made that was simply a mistake that now we don't have to make because you did?
Well, I talked about one of my mistakes, which was thinking that you have the talent, there's nothing else to learn. You can do it or not if you have the talent. And that was a big mistake because you have to learn. There is a craft. There are techniques. And what you do is you use those techniques with your voice. And I know now, when I was learning in the 50s, no one talked about role models and what books did you read to learn how to write. Now people read books, read different authors to teach them how to write. But I think it's, well, for me, a more direct way was to read books on the craft. And then I didn't have to unlearn someone else's voice. I could just apply those techniques to my own voice. Once I discovered what it was, I had to work at it and figure out what it was. And when I talk about using music, there's a poem in the book, In the Land of Words, called Nathaniel's Rap. And it starts, it's Nathaniel talking, and Nathaniel's me. I'm talking about my philosophy. Well, I had to give him a name, but I didn't know. The name had to be musical. It had to fit with the music of the other words. And sometimes now I go through a book of names and try to figure out what name do I want, what music is going to work for this poem. I can hear the music in my head, but I have to find the words that match the music. And so I knew I needed a name with 3 syllables and the emphasis on the second syllable. So another writer would have a different voice, and they may want the emphasis on a different syllable. But so Nathaniel was the name I finally chose because it was the music that I heard that I needed in my poem. And so I do that all the time because, we use alliteration, line breaks, and all that. And so the music is just another one of those techniques that we have to hear ourselves and hear our voices, what comes from us, what we want to hear, and then we have to find the words that fit that.
Mistakes that we learn from are that's a tough question, and I think
You wrote an entire book about it, Corinna. Come on.
I think there's the mistakes that we that we learn quickly from in life, and then there are mistakes that stick with us for a lot longer, and maybe it takes us years to learn from or to understand, or to even see how it's brought us back around to where we are today, where we can now be grateful for that mistake or for the way that life brought us around. But I have to say, if you dig down and you sift through all the mistakes, the small accidents and the bigger accidents and the things we really wish we hadn't done, for me, the biggest mistake of all, and I think this is actually in some ways what my book is about, even though it might not seem like it's what my book is about. But the biggest mistake probably we can make is to try to be anyone other than ourselves. And so learning to just be yourself and to be comfortable with who you are and all your quirks and eccentricities and awkwardnesses and all of that, and embrace them. I think in some ways that's a lifetime's work. And certainly when we're young, there's so much to be learned from imitating other people in life and in art. And so that imitation is part of how we learn and grow. And I think sometimes that makes it harder to separate out. You need to imitate, you need to borrow from other poets and other artists and try on what you love. And but then you also somewhere in there have to find your own voice. And at some point, stop, I think to be an artist, stop caring so much about what other people might want or want you to be, and really try to listen to who you are. Because I don't know that you can make good books otherwise.
Let me just make a brief comment. We disagreed, you know that, right? And you think we need to imitate or to do, and I think we don't. But that's good, because then you can figure it out for yourselves. What works for you? The same thing may not work for everybody.
Well, and I think imitation, when I say imitate, it's a starting point. I think what I tell kids, because in schools they'll ask, like, I have this favorite book, and can I, if I love Captain Underpants, and can I draw something that's about Captain Pants, and is that copying or is that my own book? And there's these questions about, and I like to tell them that, we all, if you're a musician, you copy. And there's a lot of sports and art forms where copying is a part of the learning. But if you only love one artist and you only copy from one artist, you are just copying. And what I tell kids is that you have to go out there and you have to fall in love with a lot of work. You have to fall in love with a lot of art and a lot of books. And the more the better. And someday all that goes in, and you're not copying anybody, because it's just a compilation of you and what you love. But you did learn it from the people who came before you, on this planet, and you borrowed some things.
So we're going to agree to disagree.
Sounds good.
I mean, it sounds like actually all of you have mentioned music in different ways. I mean, you played piano, you literally just played guitar for us, you're a musician as well, you're a dancer, and so it seems like there's a lot of there is an aspect of having a really rich creative life that contributes to your artistic journey, whether it's in writing or visual arts, that you're finding inspiration from music and dance and other things as well. And I feel like that's part of kind of what we're talking about here. It seems like a real commonality between all of you is just that playfulness and ability to experiment across forms. Do we have to open it up to questions? Yes, I don't know. I have a couple more.
But I just want to say something really quickly here. I work with children at risk, and I hate to use that word, because children are not really at risk. It's like when we go to ceremonies and people say, "Oh, it's good that you coming to pray for our children." The children really don't need anybody to be praying for them. It is us that we need to be praying for ourselves. Children are holy. Children are sacred. There's nothing wrong with them the way they are. It's just they're just fine. It is us who need to do all this type of things in order to understand who we are and where we're going. But children are just fine. But we do need to imitate the way the sun rises, the way the birds sing, the way the wind blow, the way the star shines, the way the river runs, all that beauty that we sometimes have forgotten, that our children are really are really holy, and they really don't need anything else but a hug, a good listener, They don't even need anybody to read to them. They're just fine. They're just the way they are. We just need to be around them, and that's I'm finding out that the more we keep on telling somebody, especially our children, to be that, you gotta do. Is perhaps it's not wrong, but our children, for instance. When we put them I do very short presentations with children, and then I put a whole bunch of books, you know. And I said, "You're welcome to use it to look at the books." It's so beautiful to see them, you know. They go read, they go look at the pictures, and it's something really spiritual in a way, you know, because when those kids are holding those books, there's something. It's like if they're holding a piece of tree in their hands. They're holding a bird, because that tree before that book before it was a book. It had the sound of the birds, the wind, the stars. It was in the mountain, and now it's in the hands of this kid, you know. So there's a spiritual connection to that, you know. And so words can come and nest in our heart, but we don't need to be pushing them around with kids. I don't think, you know, we can't guide them, show them, but you know, it's up to them. We just need to be around there so that nobody can hurt themselves, you know.
The idea of mistake, it's a tough one, because when I was a kid, I always thought that the eraser was necessary. And then I got back to the basics, where it was just like, just go for it, you know? Maybe start drawing with pen so you don't have to worry about erasing it. And then they came out with an eraser-mate pen. Dang it. But no, I mean, I say that because, you know, I was sitting with my nephew a week ago, and we were drawing together. We were just drawing together. And it's back to what everyone has said here in some ways. Sitting with the 7-year-old on the new sketchbook, which is the iPad. And it is what it is. There's technology and there's that bridge. But I did see, walking through here, there's some beautiful journals right in that room. Blank journals. Can you imagine that? Books with no pictures or words on the inside. So these moments of mistakes that I have collected over the years, I probably have like 100 sketchbooks full of mistakes. You know, when you start seeing it like that, I mean, it's funny. I'm having a moment in time where a museum is asking to borrow work, and the final works that are seen here, in some instances, are just little drawings inside of a whole case of mistakes. And so they want to take the whole book of mistakes somewhere. And I'm like, all my mistakes, you know? It's that moment of reveal, I think. You know, what is a mistake? You know, you'll have to keep working that word through your system, I guess. Kind of back what he said, to encourage children. That's not really a mistake. Just, like, take that line and move it. Like, the encouragement of seeing it a different way is the way I've dealt with mistakes over the years. So it's kind of just a process. We're always kind of making them, but we don't want to make the big ones over and over and over again, I think. So, yeah.